When the powers that be asked me to talk about movie vampires today, I think I was bouncing with joy for like a solid half an hour before I could focus my thoughts and ideas. I love vampire lore so much, to the point where I technically have a vampire older brother. Long story, but love ya, Alec. May you rest in peace, King. Fun little tidbit before we get into it today. The interwebs don't like when I name the reddish fluid that runs through my veins that vampires like to feast on. So if you notice some silliness from me today, I'm doing my best, I swear. Question for y'all, who is your favorite on-screen vamp? Dracula will always be my go-to, but Transylvania does get an honorable mention. Let me know your answers in the comments, and let's jump into today before I get sidetracked. How about we start things off with the Reapers from a Guillermo del Toro classic, Blade 2. Why not the first flick? Okay, well the vampires that appeared in that one were just modern takes on the stereotypical vampire, and while I enjoy them, they didn't make me shudder. So in this one, Wesley Snipes reprised his role as the titular human-vampire hybrid in this, I believe, 2002 superhero film. But this time he was squaring off against a mutant group of vampires known as Reapers, who wished to eradicate the world of both humans and creatures of the night. Eli Damaskinos, an ancient vampire elder, created this breed in a quest to eliminate the weaknesses of the vampire race via genetic sequencing of his own pure DNA. While the Reaper strain did improve some vampire strengths, and even removed some of their traditional weaknesses, it was deemed a failure, because it drove its carrier's thirst well beyond that of normal vampires, making them almost feral monsters. Their heightened metabolism prompted them to feed every couple of hours, or else they'll start feeding on themselves. The comparison was made that if normal vampires are like addicts who need to imbibe up every week or so, Reapers are extreme addicts who are constantly consumed minute by minute with the unthinking drive to get their next fix. With the exception of the first Reaper, Jared Nomak, Reapers were incapable of human speech, communicating through only snarls and growls. The genetically altered monsters possess a virus that can infect both the living and the dead, and bite their prey with their stomach-churning, three-way jaws and leech-esque sucker tentacles. Pardon me, the jaws that could transform other vampires into Reapers. So how did that work? So the two sides of the lower jaw split apart at the chin. The left and right sides of the lower jaw have fangs that inject a neurotoxin to paralyze their victims while feeding. Now this jaw is easily concealed, allowing the Reaper to surprise the victim. Their mouth also contains a toothed inner proboscis, which does the actual fluid consumption when the Reaper's three-way jaw splits apart, and is what transmits the Reaper strain into the victim. In addition, a Reaper's mouth has overdeveloped masseter muscles, which allow for a much stronger bite. So if it wasn't obvious by now, they were incredibly quick, powerful, and deadly in groups. Standard vampires will at least be stunned if nailed by standard non-silver explosives, but Reapers practically shrug off automatic weapons fire. A thick case of bone, covering their heart in the front and back, also makes it near impossible to stake them. So the Reapers challenged both Blade and the vampires he was forced to team up with to stop the terrifying new threat. So how did these abominations come to be? Well, it was because Guillermo del Toro was unimpressed by the romantic idea of vampires being tortured Victorian heroes and set out to make them scary again, achieving this goal in spectacular fashion. You really gotta hand it to him. He knows how to make terrifying creatures that will leave an impact on the psyche. And that's coming from somebody who is very much a sucker for the romantic adaptations of vampires. Pun intended. While we're on the topic of classic horror creators, how about Stephen King's Night Fliers? So this was based off of his short story, and this underrated 1997 horror flick follows competing reporters Richard Dees and Catherine Blair as they team up to investigate a series of grisly killings occurring at rural airports. Crazy to think that this movie has been out as long as I've been alive, and I never really learned about it until recently. It doesn't take long until the duo comes to the terrifying realization that a vampire is causing the icky massacres, so they joined forces to put an end to his carnage. The disturbing creature goes by the alias of Dwight Renfield, and is downright nightmare-worthy in his true form, with his giant gaping mouth, jagged fangs, weathered skin, reptilian nose, and mangy hair. So it's no surprise the creature comes from the imagination of the king of horror himself. The result of his feeding on victims results in two very large holes on both sides of their neck. His hands are more human-like, in a warped sense, with long fingers ending in extremely sharp claws and brownish gray hair sprouting from the back of the hands. He is shown to be capable of moving at rapid speeds that barely registers to the human eye when in true form, as well as having the ability to toss a fully grown man the entire length of a room without effort. So Dwight's red fluids also seem to have hallucinogenic effects if consumed. Like when he forcibly feeds Richard Dees some of his essence, Dees begins experiencing nightmarish hallucinations and visions, as well as, going woohoo, woohoo, When Dwight appears in both human form and vampire form, he wears a black cloak, much kind of like the one worn by Bela Lugosi's version of Dracula. And while in his human form, Dwight appears as a handsome man, with long, shoulder-length black hair, grayish eyes, you know. In his true form though, there's no humanity. The only attribute that he retains is that shoulder-length black hair, but then it's mangy. Almost nothing is known about Dwight's past before his killing spree though, and we also don't even know if that's his real name. There's a lot of hints, I think there's about 7 all told, that Dwight was once a skilled airplane pilot, which was shown by the Skymaster 337 that he flies, and you also see that he keeps an old photo album with him on his plane, which contains photos of him and what might have been his wife, before he turned, that is. Dwight was portrayed by Michael H. Moss, and in my opinion, very well done, because I can't even look at a still picture of this character without going, nope. Nope. So while I tend to swoon for Bela Lugosi as Dracula, there is an adaptation of the classic vamp that gives me the ick, and that would be Bram Stoker's Dracula, courtesy of Francis Ford Coppola in 1992. This gothic horror masterpiece brought the classic to the silver screen yet again, and depicted the iconic Count as he traveled to Britain to be reunited with his long-lost love, Mina. Now this adaptation is a visually stunning spectacle that brilliantly blends romance with horror, showcasing both Dracula's tender side and devotion to Mina, as well as his grisly true nature as a thirsty beast. So when it comes to his powers, it's more a question of what can't he do versus what he can do. So he's got, the obvious. Immortality. We find out he's lived for more than 400 years. With what we know now, it doesn't really shock you, but we gotta mention it. He's also got the superhuman strength, with the claims that he can possess the strength of 20 men, which brings me to you can't forget about the superhuman speed, ergo being able to move so fast that you don't really see him go whoo, 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 whoo. And you see that a lot of points in the film. Here's a terrifying trait. Shape-shifting. The Count takes a lot of different forms during the film. We're talking wolf-like humanoid covered with black fur, regular wolf, man-sized bat creature, the shape of a green mist, which is what he uses to enter Mina's room, and finally a swarm of rats, which is how he leaves the room. He's also got psychic powers, which include but are not limited to thrall and hypnosis, which is shown with Mina after she drank from his cursed life source. Here's a fun one. While the Count is certainly bothered by the sight of crucifixes, he isn't always repelled by them, which is shown when he, caused Van Helsing's crucifix to burst into flames with the sheer force of will, declaring that he could not be destroyed by their idols. I relate. Dracula is arguably the most iconic horror monster in cinema history, having been terrifying audiences across the world for over a century on screen. But in this one, Count Dracula is portrayed by the dynamite Gary Oldman, flawlessly embodying the notorious villain in all his glory. But his true spine-tingling form, the bat-like creature with the vibrant eyes, grisly face, decrepit body, that got to me. That's how he made his way to today's list, because I am not a fan of the terrifying appearance. I'm also not in the mood to be hypnotized anytime soon, unless a romantic stranger wants to take care of me for a while. Then I could consider it. Hey look, a girl can dream. Before Alexa gets lost in yet another toxic man fantasy, time to move on to Daybreakers. Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe teamed up to save mankind in this 2009 sci-fi action horror film, in which the former appears as a vampire hematologist, Edward Dalton, who is attempting to create a fluid substitute after the majority of the world's population is turned into the undead. He is visited by former vampire Elvis, who claims to have a cure that can turn them back to normal and save mankind. Little is known about the origin of the vampire race, although it is revealed that in 2009, in the movie world, a plague carried by vampire bats jumped species, infecting humans. Now, this doesn't really mean that it originated that year, as the presence of myths describing creatures identical to them implies past outbreaks, so it's just possible that the 2009 outbreak was simply one of many, and that vampires have existed for much longer than the movie explicitly states. It's also probable that the vampire virus was born from a combination of a rabies virus and certain bat genetic traits. In any case, within 10 years of that outbreak, nearly the entire human species was transformed into vampires, and those who weren't either ran or were turned. This event resulted in vampires becoming the dominant species, causing humans to flee. The vampires soon learned that they kinda needed to feed on the life source of humans in order to survive, and thus several new corporations were created to harvest and supply fluids to the masses. So the creatures in the freaky film come in different forms due to the redness shortage, causing disturbing mutations among the newly reanimated, with the worst of the bunch looking emaciated and positively ghastly, with their ribs protruding due to their starvation. Directors Michael and Peter Spierig set out to create the vampires with a classical aesthetic and adopted a more minimalist approach to make up for a dominant effect. And well, effect achieved. Seriously, these vampires look what my imagination thinks I'll find at the end of every dark alleyway. No thank you. No thank you. I think that's where my nightmares came from last night. Alright, time to end our list with a classic. Nosferatu. How could I call myself a vampire lover without including the standout on today's list? With his foreboding gaze, talon-like nails, and sharp pointy teeth, the hunchback Count Orlok was fuel for nightmares when he appeared in the 1922 silent German expressionist horror picture, bringing darkness and mayhem to the fictional town of Wisburg. Although perhaps not as conventionally scary as some of the other creatures I've mentioned today, Count Orlok is the first cinematic appearance of Count Dracula, and is without a doubt the most eerie and unsettling out of all movie vampires. Fight me on this, I dare you. The iconic scene in which a shadowy Orlok silently creeps up a staircase in search of his victim is ominous, as are the images of actor Max Schreck in all his eerie glory. The silver screen wonder and menacing character remains a highly influential masterpiece, and can still send a chill down the spine of anybody who catches a glimpse of stills from the film. Now, this portrayal of a vampire was so frightening and haunting that the 2000s Shadow of the Vampire re-explored the filming of this flick. It was under the new premise that Count Orlok's actor was actually a vampire in real life, highlighting the authenticity of Max's initial performance. I don't even need to go into detail of how terrifying Orlok is. You just see his face and know. If you don't, may I recommend giving the classic film a watch tonight? I promise you won't be disappointed. And that brings us to the end of our time, and I'm hoping y'all give this video enough love today so I can get a part 2, because I would love to touch on flicks I ran out of time for today, like Fright Night or Let the Right One In. Please, please, please. I've been Alexa, your resident ooky spooky girly, and if you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed talking today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more vampire love from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.